We continue the Varieties of Religious Experience, a study in human nature by William James. We are in lectures 6 and 7, the sixth soul, which is probably more people than the healthy one, right? For instance, on the very day on which I write this page, the post brings me some aphorisms from a worldly, wise old friend in Heidelberg, which may serve as a good contemporaneous expression of Epicureanism. By the word happiness, every human being understands something different. It is a phantom pursued only by weaker minds. The wise man is satisfied with the more modest but much more definite term, contentment. What education should chiefly aim at is to save us from a discontented life, which is actually what the Buddhists mean by suffering, not difficulty, but, distinguishing suffering from difficulty. Health is one favoring condition, but by no means an indispensable one, of contentment. Woman's heart and love are a shrewd device of nature, a trap which she sets for the average man to force him into working, but the wise man will always prefer work chosen by himself. They mark the conclusion of what we call the once-born period, and represent the highest flights of what twice-born religion would call the purely natural man. Epicureanism, which can only be by great courtesy called a religion, showing his refinement, and Stoicism, exhibiting his moral will. They leave the world in the shape of an unreconciled contradiction, and seek no higher unity, compared with the complex ecstasies which the supernaturally regenerated Christian may enjoy. Are the Oriental pantheists indulge in? Their receipts for equanimity are expedients which seem almost crude in their simplicity. Please observe, however, that I am not yet pretending finally to judge any of these attitudes. I am only describing their variety. The securest way to the rapturous sorts of happiness, of which the twice-born make report, has, in historic matter of fact, been through a more radical pessimism, seen how the luster and enchantment may be rubbed off from the goods of nature. But there is a pitch of unhappiness so great that all goods of nature may be entirely forgotten, and all sentiment of their existence vanish from the mental field. For this extremity of pessimism to be reached, something more is needed than observation of life and reflection upon death. The individual must in his own person become the prey of a pathological melancholy. As the healthy-minded enthusiast succeeds in ignoring evil's very existence, so the subject of melancholy is forced in spite of himself to ignore that of all good whatever. For him it may no longer have the least reality. Such sensitiveness and susceptibility to mental pain is a rare occurrence where the nervous constitution is entirely normal. One seldom finds it in a healthy subject, even where he is the victim of the most atrocious cruelties of outward fortune. So we note here the neurotic constitution, of which I said so much in my first lecture, making its active entrance into our scene, and destined to play a part in much that follows, since these experiences of melancholy are, in the first instance, absolutely private and individual. I can now help myself out with personal documents. Painful indeed they will be to listen to, and there is almost an indecency in handing them out in public. Yet they lie right in the middle of our path, and if we are to touch the psychology of religion at all seriously, we must be willing to forget conventionalities and dive below the smooth and lying official conversational surface and handling them in public. If I make a mistake, I sometimes try to correct it in a way that may change some of the words, but keeps the meaning right. But handling has a little bit more meaning to it, you could say. Or, well, different enough that I feel like going back and repeating. One can distinguish many kinds of pathological depression. Sometimes it is more passive joylessness and dreariness and discouragement, dejection, lack of taste and zest and spring. Professor Ribbett has proposed the name anhedonia to designate this condition. The state of anhedonia, if I may coin a new word to pair off with analgesia, he writes, has been very little studied, but it exists. A girl was smitten with the liver disease which for some time altered her constitution. She felt no longer any affection for her father and mother. She would have played with her doll, but it was impossible to find the least pleasure in the act. The same things which formerly convulsed her with laughter entirely failed to interest her now. Esquirol observed, in the case of a very intelligent magistrate who was also a prey to hepatic disease, every emotion appeared dead within him. He manifested neither perversion nor violence, but complete absence of emotional reaction. If he went to the theater, which he did out of habit, he could find no pleasure there. The thought of his house, of his home, of his wife, and of his absent children moved him as little, he said, as a theorem of Euclid. And we find this in Ribbett, Psychologie des Sentiments, page 54. Prolonged sickness will, in most persons, produce a temporary condition of anhedonia. Every good, terrestrial or celestial, is imagined only to be turned from with disgust. A temporary condition of this sort, connected with the religious evolution of a singularly lofty character, both intellectual and moral, is well described by the Catholic philosopher Father Gratry in his autobiographical recollections. In consequence of mental isolation and excessive study of the Polytechnic School, young Gratry fell into the state of nervous exhaustion, with symptoms which he thus describes. I had such a universal terror that I woke at night with a start, thinking that the Pantheon was tumbling on the Polytechnic School, or that the school was in flames, or that the Seine was pouring into the catacombs, and that Paris was being swallowed up. And when these impressions were passed all day long, without respite, I suffered an incurable and intolerable dissolution, verging on despair. I thought myself, in fact, rejected by God, lost, damned. I felt something like the suffering of hell. Before that, I had never even thought of hell. My mind had never turned in that direction. Neither discourses nor reflection had pressed on me in that way. Neither discourses nor reflections had impressed me in that way. I took no account of hell. Now, and all at once, I suffered in a measure what is suffered there. Of course, he is handing them out in public by, sharing them, but passing or prying eyes, yeah, you want to protect your personal details, at least some of them, from that. But what was perhaps still more dreadful is that every idea of heaven was taken away from me. I could no longer conceive of anything of the sort. Heaven did not seem to me worth going to. It was like a vacuum, a mythological Elysium, an abode of shadows, less real than the earth. I could conceive no joy, no pleasure in inhabiting it. Happiness, joy, light, affection, love, all these words were now devoid of sense. Without doubt, I could still have talked of all these things, but I had become incapable of feeling anything in them, of understanding anything about them, of hoping anything from them, or believing them to exist. There was my great and inconsolable grief. I neither perceived nor conceived any longer the existence of happiness or perfection, an abstract heaven over naked rock. Such was my present abode for eternity. And I had such to what we just had from A. Gratry, Souvenirs de ma Genesta, 1880, page 119 to 121. Abridged, some persons are affected with anhedonia permanently, or at any rate with the loss of the usual appetite for life. I remember a particular individual. They got out of the ecstasy thing, but after trying ecstasy, they were never they always had a degree of that. And, then came 2 other drug periods that made things worse, pretty much to a degree forever, but, The annals of suicide supply such examples as the following. An uneducated domestic servant, age 19, poisons herself and leaves 2 letters expressing her motive for the act. To her parents she writes, "Life is sweet, perhaps to some, but I prefer what is sweeter than life, and that is death. So goodbye forever, my dear parents. It is nobody's fault, but a strong desire of my own, which I have longed to fulfill for 3 or 4 years. I've always had a hope that some day I might have an opportunity of fulfilling it, and now it has come. It is a wonder I have put this off so long, but I thought perhaps I should cheer up a bit and put all thought out of my head." To her brother she writes, "Goodbye forever, my own dearest brother. By the time you get this, I shall be gone forever. I know, dear love, there is no forgiveness for what I am going to do. I am tired of living, so am willing to die. Life may be sweet to some, but death to me is sweeter." S.A.K. Strahan, Suicide and Insanity, 2nd edition, London, 1894, page 131. And, there's 3 gaps in what we shared there. Obviously, maybe some personal details who would notify who it is, because basically revealed religion, including Hinduism past, even the polytheism ones. Almost all of them are polytheism ones, but, the idea is that the suicides at least go to a realm where they repeat over and over again their suicides. The method in which they kill themselves, that sort of stuff. So, yeah. So it brings great shame to the family and stuff. Or perhaps they just don't want to be reminded by people who know, right? So much for melancholy in the sense of incapacity for joyous feeling. A much worse form of it is positive and active anguish, a sort of psychical neuralgia, wholly unknown to healthy life. Such anguish may partake of various characters, having sometimes more the quality of loathing, sometimes that of irritation and exasperation, or again of self-mistrust and self-despair, or of suspicion, anxiety, trepidation, fear. The patient may rebel or submit, may accuse himself or accuse outside powers, and he may or he may not be tormented by the theoretical mystery of why he should so have to suffer. Most cases are mixed cases, and we should not treat our classifications with too much respect. Moreover, it is only a relatively small portion of cases that connect themselves with the religious sphere of experience at all. Exasperated cases, for instance, as a rule, do not. I quote now literally from the first case of melancholy on which I lay my head. It is a letter from a patient in a French asylum. "I suffer too much in this hospital, both physically and morally, besides the burnings and the sleeplessness, for I no longer sleep since I am shut up here, and the little rest I get is broken by bad dreams. I am waked with a jump by nightmares, dreadful visions, lightning, thunder, and the rest. Fear, atrocious fear, presses me down, holds me without respite, never lets me go. Where is the justice in it all? What have I done to deserve this excess of severity? Under what form will this fear crush me? What will I not owe to anyone who would rid me of my life? Eat, drink, lie awake all night, suffer without interruption. Such is the fine legacy I have received from my mother. What I fail to understand is this abuse of power. There are limits to everything. There is a middle way, but God knows neither middle way nor limits. I say God, but why? All I have known so far has been the devil. After all, I am afraid of God as much as of the devil, so I drift along, thinking of nothing but suicide, with neither courage nor means to execute the act. As you read this, it will easily prove to you my insanity. The style and ideas are incoherent enough. I concede it myself, but I cannot keep myself from being either crazy or an idiot. And as things are, from whom should I ask pity? I am defenseless against the invisible enemy who is tightening his coils around me. I should be no better armed against him, even if I saw him, or had seen him. Oh, if he would but kill me, devil take him. Death, death, once for all. But I stop. I have raved to you long enough. I say raved, for I can write no otherwise, having neither brain nor thoughts left. Oh God, what a misfortune to be born! Born like a mushroom, doubtless between an evening and a morning. And how true and right I was in our own philosophy year in college. I chewed the cud of bitterness with the pessimists. Yes, indeed, there is more pain in life than gladness. It is one long agony until the grave. Think how gay, joys, it makes me to remember that this horrible misery of mine, coupled with this unspeakable fear, may last 50, 100, who knows how many more years. And I suffer too much. To this is Rubinovich et Toulouse, his La Melancholie, 1897, page 170, abridged. This letter shows two things. First, you see how the entire consciousness of the poor man is so choked with the feeling of evil that the sense of there being any good in this world is lost for him altogether. His attention excludes it, cannot admit it. The sun has left his heaven. And secondly, you see how the querulous temper of his misery keeps his mind from taking a religious direction. Querulousness of mind tends, in fact, rather towards irreligion, and it has played, so far as I know, no part whatever in the construction of religious systems. Now, I seldom don't go back and make and if it's actually a spiritual text that's supposed to be revealed or inspired or something, I'm going to go back and correct it. But some of these scholarly texts, I'm, like the mistake I made earlier, and then I went back and said, yeah, maybe I should literally, maybe I should correct the reading. Religious melancholy must be cast in a more melting mood. Tolstoy has left us in his book called My Confession, a wonderful account of the attack of melancholy which led him to his own religious conclusions. The latter, in some respects, are peculiar, but the melancholy presents two characters which make it a typical document for our present purpose. First, it is a well-marked case of anhedonia, a passive loss of appetite for all life's values. And second, it shows how the altered and estranged aspect which the world assumed in consequence of this stimulated Tolstoy's intellect to a gnawing, carking, questioning, an effort for philosophic relief. I mean to quote Tolstoy at some length, but before doing so, I will make a general remark on each of these 2 points. First, on our spiritual judgments and the sense of value in general. It is notorious that facts are compatible with opposite emotional comments, since the same fact will inspire entirely different feelings in different persons, and at a different times in the same person, and there is no rationally deducible connection between any outer fact and the sentiments it may happen to provoke. These have their source in another sphere of existence altogether, in the animal and spiritual region of the subject's being. Conceive yourself, if possible, suddenly stripped of all the emotion with which your world now inspires you, and try to imagine it as it exists, purely by itself, without your favorable or unfavorable, hopeful or apprehensive comment. It will be almost impossible for you to realize such a condition of negativity and deadness. No one portion of the universe would then have importance beyond another, and the whole collection of its things and series of its events would be without significance, character, expression, or perspective. Whatever value, interest, or meaning our respective worlds may appear endued with are thus pure gifts of the spectator's mind. The passion for love is the most familiar and extreme example of this fact. If it comes, it comes. If it does not come, no process of reasoning can force it. Yet it transforms the value of the creature loved as utterly as the sunrise transforms Mont Blanc from a corpse-like gray to a rosy enchantment, and it sets the whole world to a new tune for the lover and gives a new issue to his life. So, with fear and indignation, jealousy, ambition, worship. If there are, there life changes. And whether they shall be there or not depends almost always upon non-logical, often on organic conditions, and as the excited interest which these passions put into the world is our gift to the world, just so are the passions themselves gifts to us from sources sometimes low and sometimes high, but almost always non-logical and beyond our control. How can the moribund old man reasoned back to himself the romance, the mystery, the imminence of great things with which our old earth tingled for him in the days when he was young and well, gifts either of the flesh or of the spirit, and the spirit bloweth where it listeth, and the world's materials lend their surface passively to all the gifts alike, as the stage setting receives indifferently whatever alternating colored lights may be shed upon it from the optical apparatus in the gallery. Meanwhile, the practically real world for each one of us, the effective world of the individual, is the compound world, the physical facts and emotional values in indistinguishable combination. Withdraw or pervert either factor of this complex resultant, and the kind of experience we call pathological ensues. In Tolstoy's case, the sense of that life had any meaning whatever was, for a time wholly withdrawn. The result was a transformation in the whole expression of reality. When we come to study the phenomenon of conversion or religious generation, we shall see that a not infrequent consequence of the change operated in the subject is a transfiguration of the face of nature in his eyes. A new heaven seems to shine upon a new earth. In melancholiacs, there is usually a similar change, only it is in the reverse direction. The world now looks remote, strange, sinister, uncanny. Its color is gone, its breath is cold, there is no speculation in the eyes it glares with. It is as if I lived in another century, says one asylum patient. I see everything through a cloud, says another. Things are not as they were, and I am changed. I see, says a third. I touch, but the things do not come near me. A thick veil alters the hue and look of everything. Persons move like shadows, and sounds seem to come from a distant world. There is no longer any past for me. People appear so strange, it is as if I could not see any reality, as if I were in a theater, as if people were actors and everything were scenery. I could no longer find myself. I walk, but why? Everything floats before my eyes, but leaves no impression. I weep false tears, I have unreal hands. The things I see are not real things, such are expressions that naturally rise to the lips of melancholy subjects describing their changed states. And William James calls these examples from the work of G. Dumas, La Tristesse et la Joie from 1900. There are some subjects whom all this leaves a prey to the profoundest astonishment. The strangeness is wrong, the unreality cannot be. A mystery is concealed, and a metaphysical solution must exist. If the natural world is so double-faced and unhomelike, what world, what thing is real? An urgent wondering and questioning is set up, a pouring theoretic activity, and in the desperate effort to get into right relations with the matter, the sufferer is often led to what becomes for him a satisfying religious solution. At about the age of 50, Tolstoy relates that he began to have moments of perplexity, of what he calls arrest, as if he knew not how to live or what to do. It is obvious that these were moments in which the excitement and interest which our functions naturally bring had ceased. Life had been enchanting. It was now flat sober. More than sober, dead. Things were meaningless whose meaning had always been self-evident. The questions why and what next began to beset him more and more frequently. At first it seemed as if such questions must be answerable, and as if he could easily find the answers, if he would take the time. But as they never became more urgent, he perceived that it was like those first discomforts of a sick man, to which he pays but little attention, till they run into one continuous suffering, and then he realizes that what he took for a passing disorder means the most momentous thing in the world for him, means his death. These questions, why, wherefore, what for, found no response. I felt, says Tolstoy, that something had broken within me, on which my life had always rested, that I had nothing left to hold on to, and that, morally, my life had stopped. An invincible force impelled me to get rid of my existence in one way or another. It cannot be said exactly that I wished to kill myself, for the force which drew me away from life was fuller, more powerful, more general than any mere desire. It was a force like my old aspiration to live. It only impelled me in the opposite direction. It was an aspiration of my whole being to get out of life. Behold me, then, a man happy and in good health, hiding the rope in order not to hang myself to the rafters of the room, where every night I went to sleep alone. Behold me, no longer going shooting, lest I should yield to the too easy temptation of putting an end to myself with the gun. I did not know what I wanted. I was afraid of life. I was driven to leave it, and in spite of that, I still hoped something from it. All this took place at a time when, so far as my outer circumstances went, I ought to have been completely happy. I had a good wife who loved me, and whom I loved, good children, and a large property, which was increasing with no pains taken on my part. I was more respected by my kinsfolk and acquaintances than I had ever been. I was loaded with praise by strangers, and without exaggeration, I could believe my name already famous. Moreover, I was neither insane nor ill. On the contrary, I possessed a physical and mental strength which I have rarely met in persons of my age. I could mow as well as the peasants. I could work with my brain 8 hours uninterruptedly and feel no bad effects. And yet, I could give no reasonable meaning to any actions of my life. And I was surprised that I had not understood this from the very beginning. My state of mind was as if some wicked and stupid jest was being played upon me by someone. One can live only so long as one is intoxicated, drunk with life, but when one grows sober, one cannot fail to see that it is all a stupid cheat. What is truest about it is this, that there is nothing even funny or silly in it. It is cruel and stupid, purely and simply. The Oriental fable of the traveler surprised in the desert by a wild beast is very old. Seeking to save himself from the fierce animal, the traveler jumps into a well with no water in it. But at the bottom of this well he sees a dragon waiting with open mouth to devour him. And the unhappy man, not daring to go out lest he should be the prey of the beast, not daring to jump to the bottom lest he should be devoured by the dragon, clings to the branches of a wild bush which grows out of one of the cracks of the well. His hands weaken, and he feels that he must soon give way to certain fate. But still he clings, and sees 2 mice, one white, the other black, evenly moving round the bush to which he hangs, and gnawing off its roots. The traveler sees this, and knows that he must inevitably perish. But while thus hanging, he looks about him, and finds on the leaves of the bush some drops of honey. These he reaches with his tongue, and licks them off with rapture. Now, the general themes of this are universal to the story, but there's different. Is it some sort of, is it strawberries or some other sort of fruit, or what the beast is? Is he falling off a cliff? or and how is he falling? And he reaches out with his tongue and licks them off with rapture. Thus I hang on the boughs of life, knowing that the inevitable dragon of death is waiting to tear me, and I cannot comprehend why I am thus made a martyr. I try to suck the honey which formerly consoled me, but the honey pleases me no longer, and day and night the white mouse and the black mouse gnaw the branch to which I cling. I can see but one thing, the inevitable dragon and the mice. I cannot turn my gaze away from them. This is no fable, but the literal, incontestable truth, which everyone must understand. What will be the outcome of what I do today? Of what I shall do tomorrow? What will be the outcome of all my life? Why should I live? Why should I do anything? Is there in life any purpose which the inevitable death which awaits me does not undo and destroy? These questions are the simplest in the world. From the stupid child to the wisest old man, they are in the soul of every human being. Without an answer to them, it is impossible, as I experienced, for life to go on. But perhaps, I often said to myself, there may be something I have failed to notice, or to comprehend. It is not possible that this condition of despair should be natural to mankind, and I sought for an explanation in all the branches of knowledge acquired by men. I questioned painfully and perplexedly, and with no idle curiosity. I sought not with indolence, but laboriously and obstinately for days and nights together. I sought like a man who is lost and seeks to save himself, and I found nothing. I became convinced, moreover, that all those who before me had sought for an answer in the sciences have also found nothing, and not only this, but that they have recognized that the very thing which was leading me to despair, the meaningless absurdity of life, is the only incontestable knowledge accessible to man. Now, one of the things that we find is that perhaps these suicidal ideations are symbolic of the fact that there is some identity or something that they should be changing in life, that they need to, are removing from their life, but not ending their life, like it's basically it's a metaphor, like maybe you could say it broader or better. But to prove this point, Tolstoy quotes the Buddha, Solomon, and Schopenhauer, and he finds only 4 ways in which men of his own class in society are accustomed to meet the situation: either mere animal blindness, sucking the honey without seeing the dragon or the mice, and from such a way, he says, I can learn nothing after what I now know, or reflective Epicureanism, snatching what it can while the day lasts, which is only a more deliberate sort of stupefaction than the first. R. Manly suicide, are seeing the mice and dragon, yet weakly and plaintively clinging to the bush of life. Now, dragons often appear as some sort of, sign that the story is not a physical event, although I do remember I'm not sure how I covered that distance in that time with my thing, but I don't know, I guess I ran, but wasn't really in the condition to run then. But I saw this dragon in the sky while I was walking down the road. Suicide was naturally the consistent course dictated by the logical intellect. Yet, says Tolstoy, whilst my intellect was working, something else in me was working too, and kept me from the deed, a consciousness of life, as I may call it, which was like a force that obliged my mind to fix itself in another direction, and draw me out of my situation of despair. During the whole course of this year, when I almost unceasingly kept asking myself how to end the business, whether by the rope or by the bullet, during all that time, alongside of all those moments of my ideas and observations, my heart kept languishing with another pining emotion. I can call this by no other name than that of a thirst for God. This craving for God had nothing to do with the movement of my ideas. In fact, it was the direct contrary of that movement. But it came from my heart. It was like a feeling of dread that made me seem like an orphan and isolated in the midst of all these things that were so foreign. and this feeling of dread was mitigated by the hope of finding the assistance of someone. And his extracts are taken from the French translation by Zania in abridging. William James has taken the liberty of transposing one passage. The process, intellectual as well as emotional, which, starting from this idea of God, led to Tolstoy's recovery. I will say nothing in this lecture, reserving it for a latter hour. The only thing that need interest us now is the phenomenon of his absolute disenchantment with ordinary life, and the fact that the whole range of habitual values may, to a man as powerful and full of faculty as he was, come to appear so ghastly a mockery. When disillusionment has gone so far as this, there is seldom a restitutio ad integrum. One has tasted of the fruit of the tree, and the happiness of Eden never comes again. The happiness that comes, when any does come, and often enough it fails to return in an acute form, though its form is sometimes very acute, is not the simple ignorance of ill, but something vastly more complex, including natural evil as one of its elements, but finding natural evil no such stumbling block and terror because it now sees it swallowed up in supernatural good. The process is one of redemption, not of mere reversion to natural health, and the sufferer, when saved, is saved by what seems to him a second birth, a deeper kind of conscious than he can enjoy before. We find a somewhat different type of religious melancholy enshrined in literature in John Bunyan's autobiography. Tolstoy's preoccupations were largely objective, for the purpose and meaning of life in general was what so troubled him. See, there's a reason why I asked that as two questions. But poor Bunyan's troubles were over the condition of his own personal life. He was a typical case of the psychopathic temperament, sensitive of conscience to a diseased degree, beset by doubts, fears, and insistent ideas, and a victim of verbal automatisms, both motor and sensatory. These were usually texts of Scripture, which, sometimes damnatory and sometimes favorable, would come in a half-hallucinatory form, as if they were voices, and fasten on his mind and buffet it between them like a shuttlecock. Added to this were a fearful melancholy, self-contempt, and despair. Nay, thought I, now I grow worse and worse. Now I am further from conversion than ever I was before. If now I should have burned at the stake, I could not believe that Christ had love for me. Alas, I could neither hear him, nor see him, nor feel him, nor savor any of his things. Sometimes I would tell my condition to the people of God, which, when they heard, they would pity me, and would tell me of the promises. But they had as good have told me that I must reach the sun with my finger, as have bidded me to receive or rely upon the promise. Yet, all this while, as to the act of sinning, I never was more tender than now. I durst not take a pin or stick, though but so big as a straw, for my conscience now was sore, and would smart at every touch, and I could not tell how to speak my words, for I fear I should misplace them. Oh, how gingerly did I then go, in all I did or said. I found myself as on a miry bog that shook, if I did but stir, and was as there left, both by God and Christ and the Spirit and all good things. Well, good, he sort of acknowledges the three are separate. We're going to have to grace abounding to his chief of sinners, put it in a number of passages, but we'll finish that separately. If we merely seek experience, there can definitely be those issues. Or if experience merely comes upon us, then there can be those issues, you could say. But if we're pursuing correct beliefs, correct practices, whatever they be, and trying to have the experience of the revelation and inspiration, and one's personal mythologization and all that stuff, then that's something else. That's a fullness of life, you could say, and a fullness of life also found in the development that takes all aspects along with it, or whatever portion that one's capable of, right?